Okay, today we're going to talk about Chapter 23, Lesson 2, all about the imperialism in the Pacific Ocean. So, the first thing we need to talk about is why we are caring about the Pacific Islands. So, you can see here that the islands, we talked about this last time, that the islands are needed for stopping places for the ships to stop and refuel if you want to go to faraway places like Asia. Okay. And so that continues to be something we're interested in. So, one of the places that we make sure we buy is the Midway Islands. And you can see them here at the very end of this list of Hawaiian islands. It's actually not included in the rest of the Hawaiian Islands, even though it's in that row. Okay. And we don't go through it too much, but it was a naval station. It was in a big battle in World War II. The Battle of Midway was a big thing, and we still do own it today, although it's not a very big, it's not a naval station anymore, but we still do own it as a territory. We control it, okay? Um, the other islands, of course, Hawaii was our big thing that we wanted. Hawaii actually has a long history where Americans started moving there. A lot of times in the beginning, it was Christians who wanted to be, who are missionaries. And then there were interest in economically, there was the whaling trade, and then sugarcane ended up being the big thing that Americans realized they could buy up lots of land and do well in this sugarcane business. So they bought up plantations and had huge profits. And over time, Americans bought up so much land and the businesses run in Hawaii that Americans were basically the powerhouse in um, Hawaii. And so much so that when a new ruler, this queen, came to power, Liliuokalani, I spelled it wrong there, she was advocating that the Hawaiians need to take back their island and be in control and not let the Americans have so much influence. So she was seen as a threat to the American planters, and so much so that they forced her out of power. They had a coup d'etat. They asked the American minister to Hawaii to help them, and he called in the Marines to supposedly protect American interests. And they deposed her. They got her out of power, and they set up a temporary government. It's called a provisional government, and with the hope of becoming annexed by the United States. So to annex something, or they use it as a noun sometimes too. If you're talking about a building, an addition is sometimes called the annex. Okay, so annexation is when you are adding on, and Americans were hoping that Hawaii could be added to the United States for economic reasons, right? So we basically took control of Hawaii, and there was a long time period when they kept trying to get it to be annexed. So um, at first, President Benjamin Harrison signed it. He said, "Yeah, let's do it." But the Senate did not agree. There was a lot of controversy. So this is Benjamin Harrison, and so then the next president who came in was Grover Cleveland. And Grover Cleveland read up on it and educated himself, and he thought it was disgraceful. He couldn't believe that we sent in our Marines to be part of this, and so he forbid it. So then the Americans in Hawaii had to wait until the next president came in, and McKinley was more open to it. So McKinley signs it, and they go ahead with the annexation. And as you know, Hawaii became a territory in 1900, and then, of course, eventually a state. So that is how we got Hawaii. Okay. We also have military bases like Pearl Harbor is an important. So there are other good reasons to have Hawaii too, besides just the economic with the sugarcane. We end up using that for the military. Samoan Islands also became something that we were interested in. If you're not, here's a map so you can see where Samoa is. They're actually, that we originally, a bunch of different countries started getting really interested. We made a deal. We had a naval station at Pago Pago, and um, other countries, Great Britain and Germany, were also very active there. And so much so that finally one day there was a meeting in Berlin between these three powers, and they basically just split up the land between them without even consulting the Samoans. And then there were some other deals after that. And so the um, eastern part there, is called American Samoa, and we still own that today. We quickly annexed our side. The other side, like Germany and Great Britain, made a deal, and it ended up being German, and then eventually New Zealand had control over it for a while, and then it became, so the western part is just Samoa today, and it's independent, but we still control our side. Okay. All right, so all that was because we are so interested in extending ourselves into Asia. And so the big area of contention is China. China has all these resources, and they at that time were weak, that we and other stronger countries could take over and control them. And so all these countries are competing to kind of carve up sections of Asia for themselves. So you can see in this political cartoon, right, the different powers ready to like cut it up, right? And you notice that here we are in the middle. The Americans were feeling like they were late to the party and maybe going to be left out. And this idea of kind of carving up the sections of the country is called your sphere of influence. Okay, so when a foreign country comes in and controls and kind of takes part of China for themselves. Okay, and we were late to the party, and we were not wanting to miss out. So we had an idea called the open door policy. And the open door policy was the idea that, you should let all of us kind of trade in the different areas, like leave it open for trade. And of course, why would the other countries are like, why should we leave our section open for you to come in, right? So this is, of course, a political cartoon of seeing them all as vultures, which seems kind of apt to me. So this open door policy that we proposed, it was proposed by John Hay, our Secretary of State. It was not very well received by the other European countries, right? Because they were not so interested in letting us come in to trade in their areas. Until something happened that kind of changed the policies. So there's something called the Boxer Rebellion. Now, the Boxers were these guys. They were Chinese, a secret society, and they were against two things. One was Christian missionaries. They resented all of them, the Christians coming in and trying to tell them that their ways were wrong and you should, convert to Christianity. And also the foreign countries coming in and basically, like I said, carving up China. And so they started violently rebelling against these ideas. And there's a lot of murders and conflicts. And of course, they're targeting foreigners. So it ended up they had to have foreign troops go in and put this down. And after that happened, then we proposed something called the second open door policy. And in that case, finally, since the foreigners all kind of had to work together to put down this rebellion in China, now people were a little bit more open to the idea of working together against the Chinese instead of fighting amongst themselves. And so they were more open to it. And to make sure the Chinese didn't rebel again, this policy said that we were going to respect China's independence, and hopefully they could get along. Okay. I think I forgot to say that Chinese society, the reason they were called the Boxers is because at that time in history, they were doing martial arts, and in the West, they didn't really know what martial arts were, so they called it Chinese boxing back then. And so that's why it's called the Boxer Rebellion. Okay. All right, on to Japan. So Japan was very interested in getting natural resources from China, and they kind of were ignoring some of the open door policies. And so they got into conflict with the Russians, and they're both really competing to control Manchuria, which is this section of China in the map there. So this led to the Russo-Japanese War. Russo means Russian, right? And they're fighting over their rich resources in Manchuria, and there's a lot of tensions going on, and Asia is building up their military. And so the United States President Teddy Roosevelt intervenes, and he tries to get them to work out a treaty in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And so that's why it's called the Treaty of Portsmouth. You'll see in history, treaties are often named after wherever they were signed. And so he is brokering the peace and stopping this war. And so that solves it temporarily, okay? But there's still a lot of tensions going on between the different countries. We also are having a lot of tensions with Japan. We are having a problem with all of the immigrants coming to America at this time, especially in the West Coast. So, for example, they're feeding a lot of discrimination. People are tired of all the immigrants coming in, and people start to say things like this flyer shows that they don't want them in their schools, and they're facing a lot of discrimination. San Francisco School District even announced that they were going to have segregation and they had to go to separate schools. And so there's a lot of tension with the Japanese, because the Japanese have been fighting to be seen as equal and just as good as Americans out in the world of power, right? And by us treating their immigrants that way, that's showing that we don't think they're as good as us, and that Japanese were taking that like as an insult. And so Teddy Roosevelt, the president, brokers a deal, and it's called a gentleman's agreement because it is not a formal treaty. It was kind of just like, shaking hands, like, not literally, but with the leaders in Japan to say, why don't we just agree that I'll try to tone down the anti-Japanese rhetoric here in America if you'll just basically stop sending so many immigrants to us and causing us the trouble in the first place. So he did get San Francisco to change their segregation policy, and Japan said they would limit the number of immigrants that could come. But it didn't sit well. The Japanese resented it being treated that way and being thought of as less than, and so tensions are still pretty bad. And there's even some talk like some Americans, really aren't liking the Japanese, and so what they do is they send the Great White Fleet, which is 16 U.S. battleships, to cruise around the world. And the reason they did that is it's a show of power, right? To impress the Japanese and say, I know things are tense with us right now, but just remember, like, you don't want to mess with us, right? All right, so you can hear that the tensions between different countries are getting pretty bad. And of course, that's going to end up leading us into World War.